It sat in the corner of a government building, a machine so large, so loud, so impossibly complicated that it required its own room, its own staff, and its own sense of mystery. It didn't have a screen. There was no cursor blinking patiently, no mouse to guide a pointer across the void. There were no apps, no folders, no friendly desktop with a calming background photo of a mountain or a lake. There was just machinery. Vacuum tubes, wires, switches, endless rows of lights that flickered without pattern, as if sending secret messages to themselves. Paper punched with holes, the kind of holes you'd expect to see on a train ticket, not a mathematical formula. And in the middle of it all, a low, steady hum, like the machine was breathing. It was a computer. At least, that's what they called it, but it wasn't the kind you'd invite into your home. It wasn't a device of leisure or comfort or entertainment. It was an instrument of war, of calculation, of raw, unapologetic logic. They called it ENIAC, or UNIVAC, or some other name that sounded clinical and cold, like it belonged more in a laboratory than in a living room. And what could it do? It could solve equations, slowly. It could perform basic operations with the help of a team of trained operators feeding it instructions manually. It could calculate missile trajectories and census data, but only if someone told it exactly how, in exactly the right format, using exactly the right number of cards and cables. It was impressive, but not intelligent, efficient, but not elegant, and yet for some reason it felt important. There was something sacred about its presence, as if this enormous box of tubes and circuits was holding a secret, one it didn't quite understand yet, and neither did we. It made noise, it radiated heat, it blinked when it wanted to, sometimes it failed to blink at all, and when that happened, a team of humans would gather around it, wondering what had gone wrong, like doctors checking the pulse of a silent patient. We like to think of progress as something sleek and futuristic, but in truth, it often begins with bulk, confusion, and a strange sense of faith. Faith that the clunky box in the room might, eventually, become something more, something smaller, something faster, something useful. The computer didn't begin as a tool for everyone. It began as a mystery, as a riddle made of wires, as a machine we barely understood but deeply believed in. And so we fed it. We fed it data. We fed it instructions. We fed it electricity. And in return, it gave us numbers. Numbers we already knew, but now faster, louder, and with a little more magic. It was the smartest object in the world at the time, and yet it still had to be turned off, then on again, to work properly. Before the digital age was sleek and fast, before computers became thin enough to slip into backpacks or smart enough to finish our sentences, before voice assistants and predictive algorithms and 5G networks, there was a time when computing meant something slow, physical, and deeply mechanical. Machines were the size of closets. Instructions were fed by hand. Programs were not downloaded, they were assembled. And amidst this world of blinking lights and humming relays, one of the earliest and strangest moments in computing history didn't come from a line of code or a hardware failure. It came from nature. It came from something very small, something with wings. In 1947, engineers working on the Harvard Mark II, a massive electromechanical computer, noticed that something wasn't working as it should. The system had stalled. A relay wasn't switching. The flow of logic had broken somewhere in the chain, and when they investigated, they didn't find a faulty wire or a burned-out vacuum tube. What they found was a moth, an actual insect caught between electrical contacts, short-circuiting the system with its tiny, unknowing body. They removed it carefully, taped it into their engineering logbook, and labeled the moment with a strange bit of humor and precision. First actual case of bug being found. And from that day forward, the word bug entered the language of computing, not as a joke, but as a fixture. It became the shorthand for anything that went wrong inside the machine, not because it made logical sense, but because it carried with it something more poetic. It reminded us that no matter how clean our code, how tightly our circuits were wound, how careful we were with logic and sequence and syntax, there would always be something that didn't fit, something that didn't belong, something small that could bring the entire system to a halt. We never really let go of that idea. As our machines evolved, as they shrank from room-sized giants to handheld slabs of glass, we kept the term, bug, a problem you didn't expect, a flaw that slipped through testing, an edge case, a forgotten line, a one-in-a-million error that somehow, someday, finds its moment to shine and crash everything. We use the word freely now. A bug in the code, a bug in the update, a bug in the operating system. We treat them as part of the process, as normal, as inevitable. And maybe that's the most revealing thing of all, that even when we try to build perfection, clean, precise, logical systems designed to follow exact instructions, imperfection creeps in. It always has, from the very beginning. Not because the machines are broken, but because we are the ones building them, and we are not perfect. We make mistakes, we overlook things, we misunderstand how one part might interact with another. We assume stability in systems that are always changing, and so the bug becomes more than just a glitch, it becomes a metaphor, a reminder that complexity carries risk, that no matter how brilliant the architecture, how airtight the logic, there is always room for surprise. Sometimes that surprise is small, an extra semicolon, a variable misnamed, a function that loops infinitely by accident. And other times, the surprise is catastrophic. Systems shut down, data is lost, planes are delayed, power grids flicker, markets freeze, lives are affected. Because somewhere deep in the machine, a tiny error went unnoticed, until it didn't. And yet, we keep going. We keep writing code, we keep connecting systems, we keep expanding what these machines can do, knowing full well that every new line, every new feature, every new integration opens the door to new bugs. We patch, we test, we deploy, we wait. And when the next bug appears, because it will, we don't act surprised, we act prepared. Because, in a strange way, bugs are expected. They are not failures, but reminders, not flaws, but signals. They tell us that the machine is not magic, that it is, in fact, just a very fast, very obedient servant that occasionally misinterprets what we've asked it to do, or worse, does exactly what we asked, and only then do we realize we asked the wrong thing. There's something deeply human in that too. The idea that the machine, for all its brilliance, can stumble the way we do. That its errors, while sometimes maddening, make it feel a little more real, a little more alive, a little less like an unfeeling tool and more like a participant in our chaotic, imperfect lives. And maybe that's why we still laugh at the word, why we still imagine little bugs crawling through cables and dancing across keyboards, why we accept their presence even when we don't understand what caused them. Because deep down, we know. The bug is not an enemy. It's a whisper, a signal, a tiny flicker that reminds us that we are dealing with something built by us and therefore forever shaped by the limits of our understanding. The first bug had wings. It had no intention of causing trouble. It wandered into a machine it couldn't possibly comprehend, and in doing so it made history, not because it did something brilliant, but because it interrupted something we thought was flawless. And isn't that what most interruptions are? Tiny events that force us to confront our assumptions, to look again at systems we thought we understood, to slow down and investigate the places we thought were secure. So the next time something doesn't work, the next time a program crashes or a page fails to load or a system throws an error you've never seen before, remember the moth. Remember that the problem might be small, unexpected, ordinary, and yet powerful enough to stop everything. Remember that bugs are not signs of failure, they're signs of life, of movement, of trial and error, of systems built by people trying their best with imperfect tools and limited foresight. They are not there to ruin the machine, they are there to reveal it, to show us where the limits are, and sometimes to remind us that perfection is not the goal, understanding is. Even now, in a world of wireless networks and quantum processors and artificial intelligence, the bug remains. It waits quietly in every new build, every fresh release, every ambitious patch. Not out of malice, but because complexity leaves cracks, and something will always find its way through. We chase bugs, we fix them, we live with them, and, like that first moth, we honor them, not with fear, but with curiosity, because a machine without bugs is a machine that hasn't been tested, and a system without flaws is a system that hasn't been used, and a world without interruptions wouldn't be much of a world at all. Before we could talk to computers, we had to learn their language. We didn't speak to them, we typed. And we didn't look at them like friends or companions. We stared into glowing rectangles, waiting for some kind of response, some flicker of understanding in return. The keyboard and the screen were never just tools. They were portals, rituals, objects we learned to trust even if we didn't fully understand how they worked. The keyboard is simple, rows of plastic keys, each carrying a letter, a number, or a command. But hidden beneath that plastic is something far more strange, an ancient arrangement of letters, chosen not for logic, but for limitation. The QWERTY layout wasn't designed to be fast. It was designed to be slow enough to keep early typewriters from jamming, and yet we still use it. Decades later, on smartphones, on laptops, on tablets, we press the same keys, in the same places, for reasons no one questions anymore. And the screen is something else entirely. It began as a blinking cursor on a black void, just a thin green line pulsing softly like a heartbeat, waiting, inviting, demanding. It said nothing, but it asked for everything. Your time, your focus, your attention, and eventually your trust. We learned to live through these two devices. One to express ourselves, one to reflect what we said, one to type thoughts into existence, the other to make them visible, tangible, real. And over time, they became more than interfaces. They became extensions of the mind. The keyboard is no longer just a set of buttons. It's a bridge from what we think to what we write, from intention to expression. The screen is no longer just a surface. It's a mirror, sometimes flattering, sometimes harsh. A place where dreams are typed and mistakes are displayed. Together, they transform the computer from a box of circuits into a partner in thought, a collaborator in silence, a space where we go to work, to learn, to escape, to imagine. They didn't just change how we use machines, they changed how we understand ourselves. And maybe that's why, even now, when voice commands and touch screens promise to replace everything, we still go back to the keyboard. We still look at the screen, hoping to see something that feels familiar, something that understands, or at least something that listens. It's almost comical when you think about it, that the device we use to guide ourselves through an entire digital universe is named after a nervous little rodent. The mouse, small, soft-spoken, and often overlooked, became one of the most important tools in modern history. It didn't announce itself with grandeur, it didn't need flashing lights or dramatic design, it simply worked, and in doing so, it changed everything. Before the mouse, interacting with a computer was a cold and precise affair. You had to speak its language, type lines of code, memorize commands, and press keys in the exact right sequence just to make something appear or respond. There was no intuition, no fluidity, just a rigid system that demanded obedience. The computer, back then, was not something you guided, it was something you instructed. Then one day, someone had a different idea. What if, instead of typing commands, you could simply point? What if your hand could move across a flat surface and that motion could be mirrored on the screen in real time? What if computing could be tactile, not just logical, but physical? That's where the mouse came in, a small plastic shell that fit in the palm of your hand, connected to the machine by a thin cord, translating every movement of your wrist into movement on the screen. At first it was strange, unfamiliar, almost whimsical, but beneath its simplicity was something quietly profound. With the mouse, you didn't need to know commands. You only needed to move. It didn't take long for people to understand the magic of it, to point at something and see it respond, to click and make a window open, to drag and see something shift position, felt natural in a way that typing never could. It was instinctive, and that instinct became the foundation of how we would interact with computers for the next several decades. Of course, the early mice weren't perfect. The cord would tangle, the ball inside would collect lint, and the buttons would sometimes stick. But people didn't mind. They cleaned them. They learned how to fix them. Because even with its flaws, the mouse offered a kind of freedom no other input device ever had. Suddenly, the computer wasn't just a tool for calculation. It became a space you could explore, a space you could shape, a space where your hand and your thoughts could finally move at the same pace. With a mouse, you could open folders, rearrange your desktop, play games, draw pictures, navigate through endless windows and programs, all with simple gestures. Click, scroll, drag, drop, repeat. These motions became a new kind of language, not one of letters or syntax, but of motion and rhythm. We didn't speak to the computer anymore. We danced with it. And like its animal namesake, the mouse quietly made its way into every home, every office, every school. It sat beside our keyboards unnoticed until the moment we needed it. It was reliable, familiar, and surprisingly powerful. We didn't think about it much. We just reached for it. Because in a world of complicated interfaces and cryptic commands, the mouse was simple. It asked no questions. It offered no resistance. It only moved when you moved. It only clicked when you told it to. And yet, behind that silence, it controlled everything. What's strange is that we only truly notice the mouse when it stops working, when the pointer freezes, when the movement lags, when the click doesn't register. In those moments, we realize how dependent we are on something so small and quiet. Without it, we feel lost, disconnected, unable to reach the world we know so well. And so we unplug it. We plug it back in. We shake it gently. We blow dust from its sensor. We do what humans have always done when a tool stops responding. We try to wake it up. Today, as touchscreens and voice commands become more common, the mouse begins to feel like an artifact from another era. And yet, it remains. In offices, in homes, in the quiet routines of people who still prefer the feel of movement, of control, of sliding across a surface and watching the digital world respond. Some are wireless now, some are sculpted to fit your hand, some glow with lights that serve no purpose except to remind you that they are still alive, but their essence hasn't changed. They are still that small, precise bridge between you and the screen, between thought and action. The mouse never demanded attention. It never wanted to be the star. But it became the companion to every idea typed, every image edited, every folder moved, a partner in silence, a navigator of thoughts. And maybe that's why it matters so much. It never tried to be impressive. It just did its job, day after day, click by click, and the world moved with it. When computers finally made their way into homes and offices, they brought with them something deceptively familiar, a screen that pretended to be a desk. There were files, folders, a trash can, maybe even a notepad or a calendar, but none of it was real. It was all part of something called the desktop metaphor, a design choice meant to comfort us, to ease the transition from paper to pixels, by creating the illusion that what we were seeing on the screen was somehow physical, that it belonged to the same world as our notebooks, our pens, our file cabinets. It was a lie, a gentle one, a useful one, but a lie nonetheless. The digital desktop was never a real desk. The folders didn't hold anything. The files weren't sheets of paper. The trash didn't smell. The icons were just pictures, symbols standing in for functions, processes, and data. Yet somehow we believed in them. We treated them like objects. We clicked and dragged as if we were moving something tangible. We arranged our desktops with care, placing shortcuts and documents in neat little grids, not because it mattered to the machine, but because it made us feel organized. And that was the point. The desktop wasn't built for the computer. It was built for us. A trick, really. A translation layer between human instinct and digital architecture. Computers don't need folders. They don't need desktops. They store data in places we can't see, in sectors and clusters and partitions. But none of that would have made sense to us. So the engineers gave us something we already knew. They gave us a picture of a desk and told us to pretend. And we did. We pretended very well. We opened folders, even though they weren't containers. We deleted files by dragging them to a bin, even though there was no bottom. We renamed things, moved them, lost them, just like we did with real paper. It didn't matter that none of it was physical. It felt real enough. And in the end, that was all we needed. But there's something funny about the desktop metaphor. It never evolved. The world changed. The devices changed. The power and speed of computers changed. But the screen still looks like a desk. Even now, decades later, we're still using icons for manila folders, for floppy disks, for phone books, for things that either no longer exist or never made sense in the first place. We still save files by clicking on a symbol of a storage device that hasn't been used in 20 years. We still throw things away by dragging them into a tiny trash can, as if our ideas need a place to rot. We still treat the space behind our windows as if it were some sacred workspace that must be kept tidy, an illusion of productivity in a sea of distraction. And maybe that's the genius of it. Or maybe it's the trap. Because the metaphor works so well, we stop questioning it. We believe we're organizing thoughts when we're just arranging pixels. We believe we're cleaning up when we're just hiding clutter behind another window. We believe we understand the machine because it's showing us something familiar, when in reality, the machine is running thousands of processes we can't see, can't control, and don't understand. There's comfort in that illusion. The desktop makes the computer feel approachable. It gives the user a sense of place, a starting point, a feeling of control. But underneath that calm beige surface lies a world of code, logic, and complexity that no icon can truly explain. And yet, we continue to trust it. We continue to decorate our desktops with wallpapers, place shortcuts in corners, sort our digital lives into folders labeled important, stuff, or misc. We create order out of chaos, not because the computer demands it, but because we do. Because we want our machines to feel like extensions of ourselves, predictable, personal, a little messy, but always familiar. The desktop is a museum of metaphors, each icon a relic from a time when we needed help understanding what a computer could do. And like any good metaphor, it becomes invisible with time. We forget it's not real. We stop noticing the gap between what we see and what's actually happening. But sometimes, just sometimes, the illusion breaks. when a file disappears without warning, when a folder won't open, when we realize that the things we thought we understood are just masks over deeper, stranger systems. And in those moments, we're reminded of the truth, that the desktop isn't a desk, the trash isn't a bin, the folders don't hold anything, and the computer, this machine we trust with our thoughts, our work, our memories, doesn't see what we see. It doesn't care about icons. It doesn't believe in metaphors. It just runs. And yet, we still prefer to pretend. There is a strange comfort in knowing that one of the most advanced machines in the world can often be fixed by turning it off and on again. It sounds like a joke, a punchline repeated in office halls and whispered across customer service calls, but it's real. It works. And deep down, we've all come to rely on it. The restart button is not just a function, it's a ritual, a shared language between humans and machines. A silent agreement that sometimes things go wrong and the only way forward is to begin again. No other object in your life behaves like this. You don't fix a refrigerator by unplugging it for 30 seconds. You don't repair a book by closing it and opening it again. And yet, with computers, the restart has become sacred. When the screen freezes, when a program refuses to open, when the internet vanishes without warning, when the cursor spins endlessly like a wheel of uncertainty, we all turn to the same solution. We sigh, we press the button, we wait, and for reasons we don't fully understand, it works. The computer wakes up with no memory of its mistake. The programs launch as if nothing happened. The problem disappears as if it never existed. It's as if the machine just needed a moment, a pause, a breath, a reset. Much like us. But behind this simple action lies a deeper truth. The restart doesn't fix the problem. Not really. It just clears the memory. It sweeps away whatever confusion built up behind the scenes and gives the system a clean slate. A second chance. It doesn't explain why things went wrong. It just lets them begin again. And that feels human. Because we've all had days where nothing works. Days where thoughts crash into each other, where emotions stack up like broken windows, where we forget what we were doing and why. In those moments, we long for a reset button, a way to stop everything, clear the noise, and try again. Not to erase the past, but to quiet it. Not to fix ourselves, but to start from stillness. The restart button is our way of giving machines that same grace. We forgive their confusion. We allow them a break. We wait in silence as they reboot, pixels flickering, fans spinning, code realigning itself into something coherent. We watch the screen go black, then flash with a logo, then slowly return to life, familiar, calm, obedient once more. And what's strange is how much trust we place in this act. We don't really know what's happening behind that blank screen. We don't see the processes shutting down, the memory being cleared, the system checking itself line by line. We just assume that, once it restarts, it will be better, functional, ready. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the problem returns, stubborn and silent. And so, we restart again and again, as if repetition might eventually cleanse the system of whatever it's holding on to, as if persistence is the answer, not knowledge. There's a kind of faith in that, a quiet belief that things can always return to order if we just reset. It's become so ingrained in our relationship with computers that we no longer question it. Every IT technician, every office worker, every student staring at a frozen screen knows the rule. Before you call for help, before you dive into diagnostics, before you even Google the issue, restart. It's not just a solution, it's a ceremony, a way of saying, let's forget what just happened, Let's pretend this never broke. Let's begin again. Clean, clear, and ready to move forward. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it comforts us. Because deep down, we wish we had one too. A button to press when our thoughts stall, when our words don't come out right, when our emotions lag behind our intentions. A switch to flip when the day crashes, when the memory is too full, when the logic of everything no longer computes. We want to restart, to clear the screen, to breathe. The smartest object in the room still needs it. For all its power, its speed, its precision, the computer still forgets itself sometimes. It still crashes. It still confuses one command for another. And when it does, the answer is not punishment or reprogramming. It's rest. A few seconds of darkness. A moment of stillness. And then, slowly, the system returns. So the next time your screen freezes, your cursor disappears, your programs stop responding, press the button. Not with frustration, but with reverence. Because you're not just fixing a machine. You're participating in a ritual as old as the digital age itself. You're allowing the system and yourself to begin again. Before the internet became silent, invisible, and fast enough to stream high-definition video while downloading documents and updating 5 background apps at once, it made a sound. A very specific sound. A sound that could be heard echoing through bedrooms, dens, and offices in the late hours of the night when someone dared to connect. It was a mechanical opera. Sharp, chaotic, unmelodic, and yet somehow unforgettable. The screech, the buzz, the rising tones like digital birds crashing into one another. That was the sound of dial-up. It began with the hopeful hiss of the modem waking up, followed by a series of clicks that resembled a confused robot learning how to speak. Then came the crescendo, a digital scream, metallic and unpredictable, as the computer tried to shake hands with a faraway server. It wasn't a gentle handshake either. It was more like an awkward wrestling match conducted entirely in frequencies the human brain wasn't meant to interpret. But we heard it anyway. Every single time. The connection wasn't guaranteed. Sometimes, after 30 long seconds of whines and shrieks, the call would fail. The line would fall silent. You would sigh, click connect again, and subject your ears to the ritual one more time. Because you wanted to get online. Because you needed to check your email. Because someone told you about a website with a funny video that might take only 7 minutes to load if you were lucky. Because the internet back then was not instant. It was effort. And every effort came with that sound. You couldn't sneak onto the internet. The modem would expose you. Everyone in the house would know. It didn't matter how gently you opened the laptop or how quietly you tapped the keys. The moment you hit connect, the modem would wail like a tiny demon trapped in the phone line. You couldn't silence it, you could only endure it. That sound was both a barrier and a promise. It was unpleasant, yes, but it meant the process had begun. It meant the world was opening up, slowly, painfully, but inevitably. It meant information, connection, possibility. And so we sat there, staring at the screen, waiting for the noise to end, knowing that when it did, a small icon would appear and we would be online.
For a while,
the internet had to share space with the telephone. You couldn't be online and make a call at the same time. If someone picked up the phone in another room, the connection would drop, and you would be thrown offline without warning. It was a fragile relationship, this triangle between the modem, the phone line, and the humans trying to communicate. It taught us patience, and more often than not, it taught us disappointment. But it also taught us anticipation. Because nothing was instant, everything mattered a little more. Every email was an event, every website was a discovery, every download, however slow, however pixelated, felt like an accomplishment. And the sound of dial-up was the overture to all of it. A brutal, screeching overture, yes, but one that marked the beginning of something magical. Over time, the sound faded from our lives. Modems became silent. Connections became constant. The internet no longer needed to announce itself. It was just there, always on, always waiting. And with that silence came speed, convenience, ease. But something else disappeared too. That sound, grating and strange as it was, had texture, it had weight. It reminded us that we were doing something, that we were reaching across wires and systems and infrastructure to bring information to our screen. It wasn't magic, it was friction. Audible, tangible friction. Today we expect everything to be fast. We expect pages to load before we finish blinking. We expect videos to play without buffering. We expect the world to arrive in milliseconds. And most of the time it does. But sometimes when the signal drops, when the connection fails, when the website won't open and the browser just spins and spins, we feel something primal awaken in us. Not anger exactly, but a kind of ancient recognition, a memory of the time when things were slower, louder, more deliberate. And if you ever heard the dial-up sound, you never truly forget it. It lives in the back of your mind, like the hum of an old refrigerator or the flicker of a fluorescent light. It was ugly, it was inconvenient, it was beautiful, it was the sound of a world just beginning to connect. In the beginning, computers felt clean. They were machines of logic, of calculation, of order. You turned them on, and they did what they were told. They didn't get tired. They didn't forget. They didn't betray you. At least, that's what we believed. But it didn't take long for something darker to appear. Something invisible, unpredictable, and deeply human. A program that didn't serve you. A piece of code that existed not to help, but to harm. A virus. The word itself carried weight. It belonged to the world of biology, of hospitals, of fevers and quarantines. But here it was, in the digital world, slipping silently from one machine to another, spreading through floppy disks, emails, networks, unseen, unheard, unstoppable. Suddenly, computers weren't just tools. They were vulnerable. They could be infected. And the more connected they became, the more exposed they were. There was something unsettling about it. The idea that behind the screen, beneath the surface of icons and windows, there could be something hiding, something you didn't invite, something that wasn't supposed to be there. A line of code that moved on its own, copied itself, corrupted files, slowed your system to a crawl, or simply whispered chaos into the machine. And so, we built defenses. We gave them names that sounded strong. Antivirus, firewall, protection software. We installed them like digital guard dogs, patrolling every corner of the hard drive, scanning every email, inspecting every download. They worked, until they didn't. Until something slipped through. Until a new virus emerged. Faster, cleverer, more elusive than the last. And once again, we were reminded that safety in the digital world is never permanent. It is a performance, a belief, an illusion we update regularly. The firewall was the next layer of hope, a barrier, not made of bricks or steel, but of code, lines of logic that decided what was allowed in and what had to stay out. We imagined it like a castle wall, high and unbreakable. But in truth, it was porous, not because it was weak, but because it had to be. After all, a firewall that blocks everything is as useless as a door that never opens. And so we made compromises. We opened ports. We allowed exceptions. And in those small openings, danger waited.
We created passwords. Long,
Complicated, forgettable strings of letters and symbols meant to lock the doors behind the screen. But passwords can be guessed, leaked, traded, forgotten. We trusted them anyway, layering them like armor, believing that if we made them just complex enough, we'd be safe. But complexity is not immunity, and trust is not encryption. We updated our software, patched the holes, read warnings, clicked yes on terms we never understood. We told ourselves we were being careful, that our machines were protected. But somewhere, we knew the truth. No system is flawless. No wall is perfect. The threat is always changing, and no matter how secure we feel, we are never truly alone on a connected machine. Because the virus, in many ways, is not just a thing, it's an idea, a reminder that every system, no matter how orderly, is susceptible to chaos, that for every tool we create, someone else will try to twist it, that every space we build, someone else might want to enter without knocking. And maybe, in a strange way, that fear is part of what keeps us careful. It forces us to pay attention, to back things up, to think twice before clicking, to close tabs we don't trust. It reminds us that computers are not just boxes of glass and metal. They are reflections of us, flawed, ambitious, curious, reckless. We like to believe in security, in clean systems and lockdown settings and software that knows what's best for us. But what we're really believing in is maintenance, not perfection, but persistence, the quiet act of protecting something that will never be fully safe, and accepting that for now, that's enough. Every time we scan a file, every time we enter a password, every time we update a firewall or install another patch, we're not just guarding a computer, we're reenacting a ritual, a modern form of superstition, a silent agreement with the machine. I will try to protect you if you try to protect me. And most of the time, it works, until it doesn't, and then we rebuild, reinstall, restart, and pretend, once again, that everything is clean. There's a particular kind of frustration that only a computer can create. It arrives without warning, on a morning when you're in a rush, or in the middle of something important, or right before you were planning to shut everything down and go to sleep. A small window appears on the screen. It's polite at first. It says something about improvements, security, stability. It tells you that updates are available, that your system needs a refresh, that everything will be better soon. And so you click install, or maybe you didn't have a choice, maybe it started on its own. And then nothing. Or worse, everything. The screen goes dark, the logo appears, and a sentence is displayed in soft, calm text. Something like, "Installing updates. Please do not turn off your computer." A progress bar creeps across the bottom of the screen, moving so slowly you begin to wonder if it's moving at all. Sometimes it jumps forward, sometimes it stalls, sometimes it goes backward. You stare at it, you wait, you breathe, and it keeps going. What's strange about updates is how important they pretend to be, while rarely changing anything you notice. They promise performance enhancements, bug fixes, and new features. They speak in the language of necessity, urgency, even security. But once they're done, the machine looks the same. It behaves the same. The same programs are in the same places, the same icons on the same desktop, and whatever issues you were dealing with before probably didn't go away. If anything, a new problem might have quietly arrived. We live in a world of constant updates, systems that improve incrementally, invisibly, silently. Every device, every app, every operating system is in a permanent state of becoming. Nothing is ever finished. Nothing is ever final. Everything is always a version behind. And because of that, the update has become more than a task. It's a loop, a cycle, a never-ending climb towards a goal we'll never quite reach. And yet, we comply. We accept the delay. We wait for the blue bar to crawl across the screen, even when it does so for an hour or more, with no indication of progress or end. We close our work, we save our files, we sit silently as the machine reshuffles itself, line by line, rewriting pieces of itself in ways we don't understand. The update is both a symbol of progress and a reminder of fragility. It tells us that the system we depend on is not perfect, that it needs correction, adjustment, maintenance. And it tells us that someone, somewhere, decided something needed to change. A vulnerability discovered, a small improvement made, a new protocol adopted, something broke, and someone tried to fix it. But not for you. Not exactly. The update is rarely personal. It's for the system, for the machine, for the company behind the machine. It changes things you'll never see, improves settings you'll never touch, and replaces functions you didn't know existed. And yet, it interrupts your day, your flow, your mood. It teaches us to surrender, to accept that the machine must pause, and that during that pause, we must wait. It's humbling in a way, to be reminded that the device we control is in some moments not really under our control, that the illusion of command can be broken by a sentence on a screen. Installing update 47 of 103, do not turn off your computer. And so, we wait, some of us patiently, some of us with growing anxiety, some of us pressing buttons, opening laptops, restarting modems, hoping to interrupt the ritual. But the update has its own logic, its own rhythm, and it will not be rushed. It moves at the speed of back-end processes, of system files, of registry repairs and driver integrations, all invisible, all unknowable. Sometimes, after an update, something is worse. A setting resets, a shortcut disappears, a program stops working, and we ask ourselves, what was the point? Why did it change? What did it do? But no answer comes. Only the screen and the machine, quietly returning to its former state, as if nothing had happened at all. And then one day, another update arrives, and the cycle begins again. Because that's what systems do. They evolve, slowly, quietly, endlessly. Not for clarity, not always for function, but because change has become the default, because staying still is no longer an option, because to remain relevant The machine must prove it's improving, even if you don't notice, even if you don't ask. We live with this now. We've learned to expect the interruptions. We've accepted that updates will happen when we least want them. We've stopped looking for meaningful change and started treating the process like background noise, just another part of the modern rhythm. We no longer ask what's being fixed. We just wait until we can use the machine again. Once upon a time, the computer was a place for one thing at a time. You opened one program, you completed one task. The machine responded to singular attention, to clear intention. It was a workspace, not a playground. A tool, not a theater. But then something shifted. Slowly, subtly, and without us realizing, the computer stopped being a place for focus and became a stage for everything. It began with tabs. Just one at first. Maybe your email, maybe a document, maybe a simple website. But then came another, and another, and another. Each one a new window into something else. A new thought, a new distraction, a new question. Tabs opened endlessly, silently, until the top of the screen looked like a crowded shelf, each label smaller than the last, each one waiting for you to return. We told ourselves we'd get back to them, that we were multitasking, that we could manage it all. But no one gets back to all of them. Some tabs stay open for days, some for weeks. Some become digital fossils, remnants of questions we no longer remember asking. How to fix printer? Best banana bread recipe. Cheap flights to nowhere. What is RAM? The questions sit there unanswered, fading slowly into the edge of the screen. And then, while we juggle our tabs, the notifications arrive. Little pings, soft sounds, bright icons in the corner. A new email, a system alert, a calendar reminder, a social update, a background update, a warning about storage, a suggestion for focus mode, a suggestion that we mute the suggestions. The machine does not stay silent anymore. It speaks, constantly. It asks for attention, not once, but always. It believes that everything is urgent, and in doing so, it teaches us to live in a state of constant interruption. We click without thinking. We check without knowing what we're looking for. We swipe away messages before we've even read them. We answer alerts not because we care, but because they are there. The notifications become part of the rhythm. The rhythm becomes normal. The normal becomes noise. And somewhere in that noise, focus collapses. The computer, designed to enhance our minds, now fractures them. It presents too many options, too many signals, too many fragments of thought to hold in a single moment. We live surrounded by tabs, both digital and mental, each one competing for our limited attention. We try to write, but a new email arrives. We try to read, but a system prompt interrupts. We try to think, but the sound of a new notification resets the cycle. And so, we learn to skim instead of read, to glance instead of absorb, to hop between windows, between apps, between thoughts, chasing productivity in a maze of distractions. We trick ourselves into thinking we're busy when we're just reacting. And the machine does not protest. It rewards this behavior. It was built for it. The operating system no longer encourages depth. It encourages movement. Switch between apps. Swipe between desktops. Use split screen. Open multiple monitors. Create a workflow that mimics chaos. Then call it efficiency. And in the background, more tabs open. More alerts arrive. More tasks overlap. And beneath it all, a quiet sense of fatigue settles in. We don't know what we were doing. We don't know where we left off. We don't know why we feel tired when we've barely done anything, but we feel it deeply. Because switching costs energy, because attention is not infinite, because noise wears us down, even when it sounds like progress. We try to fight it. We download focus apps, we install blockers, we turn on Do Not Disturb, we light a candle, we drink water, we close the tabs. But then, slowly, we open them again, because curiosity lives beside distraction, because the same machine that helps us think also helps us escape thinking, because the same tool we use for meaning is also filled with noise, and yet, despite everything, we keep coming back. We return to the machine each day, knowing it will pull us in every direction, knowing we'll open too many tabs, knowing the notifications will interrupt us, knowing that focus, once again, will be a hope instead of a habit. But we still try. We open the document. We close the distractions. We put on soft music. We breathe. Because somewhere beneath the noise, the computer still holds possibility. It still remembers how to be quiet. It still has room for one thought at a time, if we let it. It doesn't blink, it doesn't move, it doesn't speak, but somehow it watches everything. The desktop wallpaper is one of the few parts of a computer that doesn't do anything, technically. It doesn't compute, it doesn't process, it doesn't respond to input. It just sits there, quietly, patiently, always behind everything else, like the wall of a room you've lived in for years but haven't looked at in a very long time. And yet, for all its stillness, the wallpaper is strangely important. It is, quite literally, the backdrop of your digital life. For many people, the wallpaper is the first thing they ever personalize. The factory default is polite, distant, maybe a blue swirl, a photo of clouds, a blurred gradient, designed to please everyone and no one at the same time. It doesn't offend, it doesn't inspire, it just exists as a placeholder for something more personal. And eventually, almost inevitably, we change it. We search through folders, we browse photos, we scroll past dozens of images, some too loud, some too dark, some that almost feel right, until, finally, we find one that matches something we can't quite name. Maybe it's a memory, maybe it's a mood, maybe it's a place we've never been to but somehow feel connected to. We select it, we apply it, and instantly it becomes the new background, a quiet, steady presence behind every window, every tab, every distraction. At first, we notice it. It feels new, fresh. It makes the machine feel different, like moving furniture around in a familiar room. But then, as days pass, it fades into the edges of our perception. We stop looking at it directly. It becomes part of the landscape, not visible, but felt. It influences the mood of the screen without demanding attention. It is there when we open the laptop at sunrise, and still there when we close it late at night. It does nothing, and yet it becomes everything. For some people, the wallpaper is a rotating gallery, a slideshow of photos, quotes, artwork, moments. It changes every hour or every day, like digital wallpaper in a room that never stands still. For others, it never changes at all. It's the same image, year after year, quietly aging along with the user, silently collecting the history of every session, every login, every sleepless night spent staring into the screen. And there's something poetic in that silence. The wallpaper doesn't care what you're doing. It doesn't judge. It doesn't interact. It simply remains. It watches you open dozens of tabs, watches you drag files into cluttered corners, watches you rearrange icons with careful attention for 10 minutes before forgetting why you opened the computer in the first place. It sees your spreadsheets, your essays, your emails, your playlists. It holds the screen steady while you watch movies, attend meetings, type messages to people you haven't spoken to in years. And it says nothing. It never interrupts. It never flashes. It never pings. It's the only part of your computer that asks absolutely nothing of you. But its presence is not neutral. It carries weight, even if you don't feel it. A photo of a sunset may calm your mind more than you realize. A black background might reduce eye strain, but also reflect a certain mood. A photo of your family, frozen in time, might remind you what matters, just for a second, each time you close a window. The wallpaper becomes part of your emotional architecture. The texture behind your thoughts, the visual silence behind the noise. Sometimes the wallpaper becomes invisible because you've seen it so many times that your brain no longer registers it. But sometimes it becomes invisible because you've buried it, with apps, with documents, with widgets, with windows layered on top of windows, until the background is nothing more than a thin suggestion, a soft memory beneath the mess. And yet when you minimize everything, when you collapse the clutter, the wallpaper returns, full screen, undisturbed. And in that moment of digital stillness, it reminds you that the computer, for all its power, can still be quiet. There is something timeless about that. In a machine that updates itself constantly, that shifts and refreshes and reboots, the wallpaper often remains the most stable thing. Even as operating systems change, as icons flatten and animations speed up, your chosen image stays exactly where you left it. Sometimes for months, sometimes for years. It may not reflect who you are anymore, but it remembers who you were. And that quiet memory becomes part of the atmosphere. You don't always notice how much you've changed until you suddenly do. One day you open your laptop and realize that the wallpaper no longer fits, that the city skyline you once adored feels cold now, that the motivational quote feels tired, that the photo from a past relationship stirs something you weren't expecting. And in that moment, you change it. Not because the system demanded it, not because it stopped working, but because something inside you shifted. And you wanted the outside to reflect that. You wanted a new backdrop for the same old screen. You wanted to see something else behind the familiar patterns of use. We don't think of this act as significant, but maybe it is. Because in a world of endless multitasking, of constant movement between tabs and tasks, the wallpaper is still. It's not a distraction, it's not a feature, it's a pause, a space, a visual breath. And in that breath, we find a version of ourselves, older, quieter, unchanged. There are machines in closets right now, long powered off, that still carry wallpapers no one remembers choosing. Images frozen on hard drives, never to be seen again. Pieces of digital identity preserved in silence. And maybe that's the most human part of all. That we gave the machine something as impractical as a background image, just to make it feel a little more like us. There's something quietly humbling about the way we treat computers. We rely on them every day for tasks that seem small and ordinary, but are, in truth, remarkably complex. They remember things for us, calculate results for us, help us speak to people who are far away, store our documents, our ideas, our distractions, our memories. They do all of this invisibly, quietly, without complaint, working in the background while we move through our lives, never thinking too much about what they're doing or how they're doing it. And then, one day, often without warning, they stop working. The screen freezes, the cursor vanishes, the window won't close, or worse, the whole system just locks up. No explanation, no apology, just a machine that no longer responds. And in that moment, we don't scream, we don't panic, we don't open a manual or call a technician. We do what we've always done. We restart it. This act, so simple, so instinctive, has become something sacred, a ritual passed between generations of users, technicians, casual workers, and lifelong tinkerers alike. Whether you're a software engineer or someone checking email once a week, you've heard the same phrase more times than you can count. Try turning it off and on again. And what's strange is how often it works. It doesn't solve the underlying problem. It doesn't explain what went wrong. It doesn't teach us anything about how to prevent the issue next time. It simply clears the confusion, resets the system, and allows the machine to begin again. We've come to depend on that, on the idea that no matter how overwhelmed or tangled the computer becomes, there is always one way out, one command, one moment of darkness, a pause, a silence, and then light again. The fans spin, the logo appears, the machine reboots, and everything feels better, even if nothing has truly changed. There is something almost human in that, something we recognize, not in logic but in spirit, because we too carry tasks for too long. We too open too many windows in our minds. We too forget to close processes, to save our progress, to give ourselves a moment of rest. We too freeze without warning in the middle of something important, not because we're incapable, but because we are overloaded. We've been running too long without pausing. And when that happens, when everything inside us feels misaligned and chaotic, we look for the same thing the computer needs, a restart. We are not machines, and yet we created machines in our own image. Complex, layered, capable of astonishing things, but never invincible. We built computers to assist us, to extend our minds and accelerate our work. But we also built them to mirror us, to behave like us in ways we didn't expect. We gave them memory, and then learned how much they could forget. We gave them multitasking, and then watched them crumble under the weight of too many open processes. We gave them clarity, and then saw them stumble through confusion. And perhaps the most revealing thing we gave them was the ability to begin again. Because the restart is not just a fix. It's a gesture. A reset of logic, yes, but also a return to rhythm. When we restart a machine, we are acknowledging that the system is not broken, it is simply stuck. It has reached the edge of its capacity to manage what it was asked to handle. And it needs a break, a moment of silence, a clearing of memory and process. And we honor that need, not with frustration, but with patience. We wait, we breathe, we watch the screen go dark, and then slowly light back up. And we trust that the machine, in its quiet way, knows how to return to itself. And isn't that what we need too? To return to ourselves? In a world that celebrates constant activity, endless scrolling, and uninterrupted productivity, the idea of stopping can feel like failure. We're told to push through, to stay busy, to keep every tab open and every alert on. But that pressure, that pace, that refusal to pause, it doesn't just exhaust us, it fragments us. It fills our minds with endless processes we didn't intend to run. It leaves thoughts half finished, tasks half done, emotions half felt, until, like the computer, we become unresponsive, disconnected, silent. And in those moments, when everything feels too much, we rarely give ourselves the grace we give to our machines. We don't press the restart button on ourselves. We keep running, slower and slower, until we crash entirely. But what if we didn't? What if we treated ourselves like the systems we manage every day? What if we gave ourselves permission to stop, not forever, not dramatically, but simply enough to breathe? The smartest object in your room still needs to restart. It doesn't matter how new it is, how expensive, how fast, how beautifully designed. Eventually, it will get overwhelmed. Something will freeze, a program will hang, a process will loop endlessly in the background, eating up resources. And you won't know what's wrong, only that something isn't right. And you will restart, and the machine will return, not perfect, not transformed, but functional again, centered again, present again. And so perhaps should we. Because the more we build machines to do what we do, the more we realize that our rhythms are not unique to us. Our needs for clarity, for stillness, for reset are embedded in the very systems we've created. We've encoded our limitations into the code itself, and we've given our machines the one tool we've always longed for ourselves, the ability to shut down, clear memory, and begin again. There is something beautiful about that, something almost wise. And it's ironic, isn't it, that for all the intelligence we've programmed into our devices, for all the complexity they can handle, the most effective solution is still the simplest one. Turn it off. Let it rest. Let everything go dark for a moment. Then let it come back. We reboot not because we failed, but because we are ready to try again. We reboot not because the system is weak, but because we want it to be strong again. We reboot because there are some problems that can't be fixed by pushing forward. They can only be fixed by stopping. And the computer, with all its power and knowledge, accepts this without resistance. It never apologizes for restarting. It doesn't see it as a flaw. It simply resets and continues, as if to say, this is part of the process, not an interruption, but a necessary part of the cycle. So the next time you reach for that restart button, pause for a moment. Not in frustration, but in recognition. You are participating in something ancient and modern at the same time. You are giving grace to a system that has done its best and now needs a moment. You are saying, without words, that it is okay to stop. That stopping is not the opposite of progress. It is the path toward it. And maybe, in that moment, you'll remember that you, too, are allowed to stop, to clear your screen, to close your windows, to shut down the noise and restart not from the beginning, but from the center, the place where you can hear yourself think again. Because no matter how smart a system becomes, no matter how fast, how sleek, how powerful, it will always need a moment to breathe, and so will you.